fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas.
None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show, weekdays 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And now your hosts, Joe Hagmann and Jon Robberson.
Hello and welcome to this Friday, May 18th, 2018 edition of the Hagmann Daily Show. Joe Hagmann here. We're going to get right into it as we have Bill Salas going to be joining us in about 10-15 minutes to cover some prophecies, some Israel stuff. But we have breaking news of a shooting at a Texas high school, 8 to 10 confirmed dead and many more injured. The law enforcement sources confirmed to ABC 13 that 8 people are dead following a shooting inside a Santa Fe high school. Sheriff Ed Gonzalez says the death toll could rise to 10. Those killed include students and adults. The statement from the school district was just issued and says this. This morning, an incident occurred at the high school involving an active shooter. The situation is active, but has been contained. There have been confirmed injuries. Details will be released as we receive updated information. Law enforcement will continue to secure the building and location. All other campuses are operating under the regular schedules at this time. Students from the high school are being transported. Okay, blah, 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 blah. So here we have another school shooting, and from what I'm hearing, speculation is that a fire alarm was pulled similar to what happened at Parkland in Florida. And I do have to apologize to the audience. I have been running around doing errands all morning, and then I got back and cooked some food, and I haven't really had a chance to sit down and go through this stuff, and just sitting down preparing to open up this show, this was news to me. Now, I did hear earlier in the day about the possibility of an active shooter at a Texas school, but I kind of just shrugged it off because I see these reports almost on a daily basis, and they've been false alarms a lot lately. But we're going to continue to look at this. We're going to continue to break this down and see what's going on. There's already, as you can imagine, people saying it's a false flag, people saying that it was a drill, that it was faked. I have no idea. I mean, no matter what happens with these events, you always have people saying that, so it has lost really its value as far as, and I think it's more of a tool to discredit the alternative media. But we're going to continue to follow this story and see what is going on. Now, let's take a second, and I'm going to bring John in here, but while I'm bringing him on, we're going to go live to the Santa Fe high school shooting
because they
and
just
see what's being
didn't know
reported.
what was going on. They didn't know where it was safe to go. They had no idea what to do other than just stay in place, stay hidden, and try to stay calm. But, it's easier said than done. She was saying that there was a girl who was right beside her who was simply having a panic attack. As you can imagine, something like this happening and looking around and figuring there's no way out, no way to get away from the gunfire, and that is all these students wanted to do. I spoke with another young man. He says very early on he heard a fire alarm. He believes his friend may have tripped the fire alarm. He believes his friend may have seen the shooter before the shooting happened. He said after the fire alarm, kids were getting out of class, going orderly, and then the shooting started. And he said from that point on, he knew he had to get out of there. He knew he had to get his friends out of there too. Listen to what he had to say.
All right, we're going to, that's live coverage. But as I said, the guy just reported on it. They did pull a fire alarm. So similar to Parkland in the sense that they pulled the fire alarm to draw people out of the classrooms before opening fire, which is very disturbing to say the least. So, another mass shooting, another school shooting, and prepare for the liberally insane media to beat the drums on gun control for another week to 10 days. Prepare for a reemergence of David Hogg and Ava Gonzalez and their anti-NRA, anti-American hate speech. We know where this goes. We know how this is going to play out. Our prayers go out to the victims and the victims' family involved. But it is, unfortunate that these things continue to happen, and in my mind, continues to bolster the case for the need for armed school personnel. John.
Amen and amen. I would like to say happy Friday to everyone, but certainly we've got more of a circumspect program today with many reports, 8 dead in Texas, reporting 9 dead. And of course, the story is developing. Joe, I mentioned this when we co-hosted the Hagmann Report together last night. There is a YouTube channel that I cannot recommend enough. And this is for people who have been concealed carry for 20 plus years, or individuals, Joe, who are considering purchasing their first firearm and they need training and all of the mental knowledge as well as physical training that goes with it. And that YouTube channel is Active Self-Protection. Active Self-Protection. It is it's an enormous channel. He has like 800,000 and some odd followers. But the gentleman who does it is also a pastor. So he has a really well-balanced, Joe, approach to self-defense, both unarmed hand-to-hand self-defense, what he calls empty hand defense, as well as managing a firearm properly. And I hate to say it, as a firearm owner, Joe, and a big Second Amendment guy, I don't like seeing society drift the direction we are. But and if I could control it, I would put a stop to this today. But I cannot come up with any better mitigating factor than to arm yourself and be prepared, if necessary, to neutralize a active shooter situation. That YouTube channel, again, is Active Self-Protection. We have no affiliation with the channel. It's just a personal preference, Joe, but it's loaded with tons of good information.
Yeah, absolutely right. And this, it's so frustrating to sit here and watch these things unfold, and then have the media
super frustrating,
completely attack guns as it is. And the media is so dishonest, John. I watched Paul Joseph Watson has a new video out this morning. So does Mark Dice. They were both on the same subject. I kind of like when that happens. It's pretty funny. But I tweeted out Paul Joseph Watson's video because he hit the nail right on the head with what the media did to President Trump yesterday. And I don't know, John, if you saw this. I didn't even see this until I watched the videos this morning. Apparently, President Trump was asked about MS-13 gang members, and he called them animals, the people who are, killing and raping children and raping women and murdering women. Well, the whole liberal media deceptively edited that video, and all the news coverage about this was that President Trump called all illegal immigrants or immigrants animals, knowing full well that was in the context of talking about MS-13 gang members. And that just shows me how sloppy these people are, how desperate they are, and they are killing themselves. They're shooting themselves in the foot because they are the most dishonest people in this country. They're anti-American. They are the true threat to free press and the republic, not the other way around. It's not President Trump's attacks on the media that are a threat to the democracy or the republic. It is the media's constant lying, their constant deception, their insane ideology, their satanic beliefs. That is the true threat to this country.
Get it, Joe. That's exactly correct. And we have probably one of the more prominent guests that we've been blessed to feature on the Hagmann Daily Show joining us here momentarily. And of course, that's Bill Salas, Prophecy Depot Ministries. And I think what Bill will join us today and cover in part, Joe, is a proper biblical, historic, and prophetic context, which is, in my opinion, the only way to logically analyze or parse through these incidents. I mean, we're having active shooter mass casualty events on a weekly basis. If they're not occurring here in the United States, we've got people being mowed down in all of the Western European countries. And when those fail to present an MCE for the week, there's always something happening either in Asia or Africa. So this is a regular situation. It is the personification of what I consider the Battle of Evermore, which is the battle between Satan and his 1/3 legion and the army of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Choose this day who you will serve. I had a long conversation last night, Joe, with Honeybee, talked to her for over 2 hours, and we discussed in specifics this spiritual battle. And it's been amazing to watch journalists like Honeybee and Liz Crokin and Sean from SGT and many others who are in their own progress, and step by step, they're rediscovering and reinitiating their own faith walks. Why? Because they work in the same world that you and I do, brother. And you cannot fight this fight. You cannot make sense of the info war, or in the case of Texas today and the shooting in Florida at President Trump's resort there, you cannot make sense of these issues unless you look at them in the manner that we will with Bill Salas. Joe, I have one more thing I want to drop, and it's very quick. When we look at Jonathan Oddy, or Odie, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, the shooting perpetrator in Florida, the other shooting today where fortunately nobody was killed, he had a real situation where he was very vocal about the whole Colin Kaepernick NFL taking a knee type thing. And according to developing reports, he was invited to or was going to participate in a dialogue with President Trump, with his administration, about race relations. And then that ties in, interestingly, to what TMZ is reporting today, probably the only time you'll hear me source TMZ this month, which is that Jay-Z convinced rapper Meek Mill to cancel a visit to the White House. And Joe, this visit was sit down with... Okay,
a
let me
rapper
back
was
up.
supposed to go to the White House?
Yeah, Jay-Z, noted Trump hater, big-time buddy of Barack Obama. He has been making phone calls to other prominent hip-hop stars, this in particular Meek, or Meek Mill, MC Meek, who was going to join the president later this month at the White House for a discussion about race relations with a particular emphasis on prison reform. So, Joe, this just amplifies what you said a moment ago. The violence, the misinformation, and the straight-up lies are not being perpetrated by the White House or by President Donald Trump. I have two examples sitting right here in front of me. Number one, the shooter in Miami, or the shooter in Miami-Dade, was supposed to be part of a dialogue about Colin Kaepernick, the NFL, and race relations with the president. Instead, he goes and lures police into an ambush-style shooting match that he lost. And then the second one is, again, from TMZ today. It says right here, Jay-Z is calling around the hip-hop community and making it clear to...
Uh-oh. I just screwed that. I was trying to bring Bill Salas on, and I dumped John. So let me get him back. John's on hold. All right, hold on. Okay, John, you there?
Yeah, I got
put on hold
somehow.
I apologize. I went to add Bill, and I did not hit add to call, and it put you on hold, so I apologize for that. But, okay. He's calling other hip-hop artists and encouraging them not to go to the White House.
He's discouraging them, and he's basically telling them, look, your career will be negatively impacted by meeting with the president. So whether we're looking at the suspected shooter, the perpetrator in the Miami-Dade shooting, or we're looking at the president's attempts to sit down with leaders of multiple different ethnicities in this country at the White House to discuss prison reform, it is the left who are pushing back, crossing their arms, and saying, we don't want to have the discussion. And in fact, if you hip-hop stars attend this meeting, it will negatively affect your career. We'll mess with your livelihood if you meet with the president to try to negotiate and talk some of these issues through. So what happens, Joe? People get angry and they start shooting bullets at each other.
That's right. And we have with us a best-selling author and researcher, Bill Salas. He's been a guest, a longtime guest and friend of the Hagmann Report, and we have him here on the Daily Show to cover a whole host of issues, specifically with this week, with the news and current events, really tying into Bible prophecy with the embassy move to Jerusalem and with the talks of the peace process to the two-state peace solution. Bill, welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show.
Hey, Joe. It's great to be on the program with you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's been too long, and we were thinking about you this week when all this stuff was starting to unfold, and absolutely want to hear what you have to say about all that's going on in Israel. We're seeing a lot of people very concerned about what this means in the prophetic timeline, what this means as far as prophecy is concerned with this peace deal that is attempting to be brokered. And there is a lot of uneasiness out there. But one thing's for sure, we are living in very prophetic times. And I'll just ask you right out, first and foremost, the 70-year anniversary to the day that Israel was established as a nation. they did this move to move the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing it as the rightful capital of Israel. They did that on purpose, obviously, right, Bill?
Yeah, that was really spectacular, and I'll tell you, it's interesting because our U.S. Ambassador, David Friedman, our U.S. Ambassador to Israel, came out with a recent quote just the other day and said that Donald Trump believes that he's on the right side of history, but also that he's on the right side of God. Now, how biblical is that, of course, Joe? Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's sort of and I want to say this tongue-in-cheek, is sort of in a love fest with Donald Trump right now. They've never been so ecstatic about, and Trump's popularity is just burgeoning in Israel. But he said on the May 14th 70-year anniversary, when Donald Trump, he had Ivanka Trump, his daughter there, they moved their embassy, our U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in commemoration. He said that by acknowledging history, you have made history. And, we're talking about history of this goes back to the time of King David, when Jerusalem, Zion back there was the name, and Jerusalem, another name for it, was acknowledged the presence, the Jewish presence, of course, which predates all other claims, any Arab claims and this sort of thing to Jerusalem. So it was a very momentous day. I would also say that was fascinating because, well, you had pictures like I go to the Drudge Report frequently. They've got, pretty good, interesting headlines, sometimes with things that have biblical perspectives to it. And they had a picture on their main shot of Ivanka Trump standing by this stone placard. Donald Trump says Embassy United States of America. That's on the embassy. Donald Trump president and Michael Pence vice president. It's a little memorial thing. And on the other side of the Drudge Report, it had IDF thwarts terror attack, live updates. Netanyahu praises Trump for real leadership. Erdogan from Turkey. USA has lost its mediator role. Arab League meets over illegal move of embassy. Iran urges global resistance. Yemen fires missiles at Saudi oil facility. Al-Qaeda leader calls for new jihad. I'm telling you, talk about a spark that could ignite a flame that has epic ramifications. That embassy move was huge.
Wow, indeed it was. And for our listeners just joining, our guest here on Friday, May 18th is Bill Salas. Go to prophecydepotministries.net, and there's just an enormous depth of information. And Bill Salas has been a dear friend of the Hagmann Report, really going back to the early days of the program. Supporting our effort and informing our global audience for many, many years. And Bill, you were kind enough to send over your recent article, Trump Dumps Iran Nuclear Agreement. So now what's the future of a nuclear Iran? And just to borrow quickly from your piece, you wrote, Bill, on May 8th, 2018, with the swoop of his pen, President Trump made good on his promise and withdrew from the JCPOA and reinstated crippling sanctions upon Iran's already struggling economy. Shortly after Trump's decision, Fox News analyst Dana Perino stated that, quote, "This is the most consequential decision Trump has ever made," end quote. Bill, I'll hand it to you. Take it from there.
Well, I thought that was a fascinating. I wasn't surprised by his decision to walk away from the deal. On July 14th of 2015, this deal was negotiated with Iran, called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And it was with the P5+1, just with some basic history on this. That's the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, which would be Britain, France, Russia, China, America, and then the +1 was Germany. So during the Obama's and John Kerry's reign administration, this deal was crafted. And at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu said this will pave a pathway to a nuclear weapon, whereas Barack Obama said we have eliminated such pathways to a nuclear weapon. At the time, Donald Trump said that this was they get everything, we get nothing. That was his comment subsequent to that deal. Anyway, it was adopted in October of 2015, later that year, and implemented in January 16 of 2016. So there's a basic history there. But on October 13th of 2017, Donald Trump announced that he would not recertify the he had the ability to recertify this deal, and he said he said in January of 2018 he warned again that he would terminate this deal. Well, it was in January of 2018 that the Mossad went over into Iran and came out with this massive intel, heist of 100,000 documents that showed that Iran had a secret nuclear facility that they had duped the P5+1, and it pretty much gave all the ammunition Trump needed to withdraw from the JCPOA, which he did do on May 8th. He's supposed to do it on May 12th. He upped it till May 8th. And it was interesting that transpired. The backstory to that was our U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had made a trip to Tel Aviv on April 29th, just about 10 days prior to Netanyahu making this announcement. Donald Trump making this announcement. And he said to Benjamin Netanyahu said to Mike Pompeo, he said, "We have this abundance of information we got from Iran, 100,000 documents. We've only filtered through about 40% of it. Why don't you get a hold of President Donald Trump and ask him if he wants us to spill the beans now or wait till a later date?" And Donald Trump told Mike Pompeo, "Let's come out with it right now." So that came out just about a week prior to Donald Trump making his final decision, which gave him all the ammunition he needed to walk away from that deal, which indeed he did. Like I said, Dana Perino says that's his most consequential decision. Now, what a statement, considering all the decisions he's made: move the embassy, this sort of thing, build a wall. And send Mike Pompeo and try to get a nuclear denuclearization going on with North Korea. The prisoners come back from North Korea. So this is a huge deal. I'm kind of gave them all a history about that. But his main concerns with this deal, he had three primary concerns. This deal had no protection to deter Iran from developing their intercontinental ballistic missiles, and it had a sunset clause, which after I believe it was a 10-year window, Iran would be able to break out with a nuclear weapon in a short time frame, and it did nothing to stop the funding and spread of their terrorism throughout the Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu calls it their noose of terror, and of course they've got control of Lebanon now with the Hezbollah, with 150,000 missiles pointed at Israel. They've got control over Syria with their proxy Bashar al-Assad, who's remained in power after that 7-year revolution. They've got controls over large swaths of territory in Iraq. They've got control over Yemen now with the Houthis, who are firing missiles into Saudi Arabia. And so we're really at a point right now in a chess match. I would call it a chess match. The inventors of chess, Iran, believe at this point, I sincerely believe, especially with their relationships with Russia that are developing and burgeoning, that they've got a position where they got Israel put in check. But I think what's going to happen is they're going to find out that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are going to reverse it and put them in check, if not checkmate. And now we're starting to talk about, well, how would we know that? Well, then we start talking about biblical prophecies. What's the biblical narrative? What's the prophetic perspective to all this? And that's sort of what we specialize over at prophecydepot.com.
Yeah, and John, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Bill, forgive me. I misspoke a moment ago. prophecydepot.com, not .net. Bill, I want to ask you quickly, and then I'll hand it to Joe and yourself. We had Greg Hunter from USA Watchdog, usawatchdog.com, joined the program on the evening show approximately a week ago, and he dropped a bombshell piece of breaking news. And it was essentially that there was a document created by then Congressman Pompeo indicating that there really never was a proper agreement, a memorandum of understanding or a executive order per se from the Barack Obama administration, that in fact this entire Iran deal that you just gave us some great analysis pertaining to was really just essentially kind of a verbalized, almost a napkin deal, for lack of a better term. Any thoughts on that, Bill?
Well, and I'm not a specialist on that, but I had heard a similar thing. I don't know that it was ever really enacted officially with the appropriate signatures from all parties, even from Iran. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but you're probably right. It was a napkin kind of a deal that was forced through because Obama wanted that as part of his legacy, and for Trump to come around on May 8th and just swoop it out with a stroke of a pen, as I wrote in that press release, was incredible. And not only, it sparked this wonderful relationship that was already, going well with Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, who was relieved after his terrible relationship with Barack Obama. Barack Obama's popularity ratings in Israel were down in the single digits. Trump's is, I believe it's well over 50% at this time. So it was a reprieve to have Donald Trump in from Israel's perspective. And like I say, they are vastly excited about Donald Trump. They can't find enough articles about how much Israel likes Donald Trump right now. But when that deal came out, again, I think they just forced it down everybody's throat, and no one really, I'm not sure it was, like you say, ratified appropriately.
Well, I want to ask you this, Bill, because you talked about North Korea and what the president was able to accomplish as far as bringing Kim Jong-un into discussions and then having an agreement to denuclearize and really attempt to become part more of the UN, the world political body. I want to ask you this. Do you think that he saw the writing on the wall as far as what's happening in Syria, what is happening in Iran, and decided, hey, it's better to be safe than sorry. There's probably war on the horizon, and we don't want to be on the wrong side of this? Or do you think that something else motivated him to change his mind?
Well, I think there's multiple dynamics in play when it comes to North Korea. Donald Trump called him the little rocket man, and vowed to show him fire and fury. And essentially, I think Kim Jong-un was a little bit concerned about this new John Wayne guy we got in the office, who's very much like Ronald Reagan was. In other words, he operates from a position of strength, not weakness in diplomacy per se. And I think Kim Jong-un was concerned that Donald Trump really would turn the North Korea into a parking lot. Also, you got to remember that he witnessed the Olympics in Seoul in South Korea, and they were a huge success. And such technologically advanced graphics and images and things like that were coming out, showing the wealth of being on the right side, South Korea with America and that sort of thing. So, not to mention the fact that a lot of his people are eating grass and very upset with this leader, and his nuclear weapon testing program is I would say a little bit behind schedule as far as I think he's concerned. So it really makes a lot of sense for him to come on board. And if he does come on board, it was a goodwill gesture when Mike Pompeo, in just a couple weeks of being the Secretary of State, goes over there and accomplishes getting these 3 prisoners released. It was reminiscent to, Jimmy Carter when he was president, and you had the Ayatollah take over in Iran, the mullahs and stuff. For 444 days, they held 52 hostages in Iran, American prisoners, and Iran vowed they would never let those hostages go, especially when Jimmy Carter was in office. And Ronald Reagan, on his way to being inaugurated, threatened to turn Iran into a parking lot, and immediately they sent those prisoners home. Well, within 2 weeks, Pompeo goes over, and these North Korean 3 prisoners were coming home. So now some people are saying Kim Jong-un is playing cat and mouse, and he's done this before. He'll act like he's a friend so he can buy some more time and figure out what he's doing, maybe huddle up with China and this sort of thing. But it's possible. And I'm sure he's going to want a lot of, assurances from Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump's prepared to give him some. Donald Trump's our businessman. He's running this country like it's a business, and it's got the country polarized. But frankly, it seems to be working. And he may accomplish what has not been accomplished, since the Korean War in the late 40s. And with all the things that have happened in the decades that passed, he might actually be able to reunite North Korea and South Korea. There's a willingness to do this right now. It seems to be economically lucrative and politically expedient for all the parties concerned, especially North Korea. But we'll have to wait and see, and that's the attitude Donald Trump has. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and it's really amazing to watch the huge difference. On Drudge right now, they have the story about the president dismantling Obama's legacy. And thank God for that, because Obama's legacy was a stain on the history of America. And especially when you talk about the relationship to Israel and what his administration did in the Middle East with the Arab Spring, it is very refreshing to see President Trump, in the change of pace that he has brought. But we still see this huge deep state media political apparatus is doing any and everything they can to hinder and stop all the accomplishments that the president's trying to bring about. Do you think that, and this gets more into the domestic stuff, Bill, but the deep state, what's labeled the deep state, you have the president and his agenda. And the American people overwhelmingly support this agenda. But then you have the deep state hindering him at every turn. And the reason I want to bring this up is because if we were to get into a war, do you think we would still see the same amount of undermining, the same amount of lies from the media, the same attacks on the president if we had to engage in some type of war? Really, it seems like we're a nation divided, and it's divided along the lines of, I guess, what Trump represents, the American people, the Constitution, and the Christian religion versus everything else. And it just seems like with this divide that if we were to get into some kind of conflict, that we could destroy ourselves more so than any outside force.
Well, as I look at not only the secular worldview with the mainstream media, and I look at the biblical narrative and the prophetic perspective, which is, of course, available to us who trust the Bible as the inerrant word of God, because it's a third of it is prophetic, predictive information. I don't see the deep state really going away as we would describe it, because what happens is the world will ultimately unite in a global order. We have a harlot world religion that will ultimately come into being when the world is in such chaos. World wars are occurring. We find this out in the book of Revelation chapter 6 with the seal judgments. And we have this global order that takes place, like it's the fourth horseman of the apocalypse is what it's commonly called. And and then ultimately that gives way to the world order of the Antichrist. The harlot world religion comes in first, then comes an Antichrist. And if we're as far down on the end times line as many of us suspect we are, that is just going to happen. I mean, we're already seeing, I think, the foundations of that underlying and perhaps the deep state and that sort of thing. What Donald Trump has done has been sort of, I think, it says in Daniel 2 verses 20 and 21 that it's the Lord who changes times and seasons, removes and raises up kings, and gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. I don't think there's a lot of time left for Donald Trump to really make America great anymore. I think that Donald Trump was put in, God had put him where he is right now. Like all of the kings are in their various places right now across the chessboard. He's one of the kings, along with Benjamin Netanyahu, that I think God has in place right now, so that the biblical prophecies that are very Israel-centered, that actually show Israel surviving through some assaults, prophetic assaults from their Arabs around them and from a massive invasion with Russia and Iran. Someday it's in Ezekiel 38. I think Donald Trump's the guy for the hour right now. We're already getting reports that Benjamin Netanyahu is more emboldened now as a leader because of the support underneath him with Donald Trump and things like that. So when you look across the spectrum, ever since the Arab Spring, really, you've got all the right kings in the right places, and you even got all the bad and wrong kings in the right places. So when you look at, like, for instance, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense secretary, Avigdor Lieberman, you may as well be looking at an Old Testament image of Joshua and Caleb. These were the guys who were willing to fight. They realized they had the nation depended on their leadership. They trusted in, I'm not going to say these are, they're trusting in God so much, but of course Joshua and Caleb did. But they were the guys for the hour at that time, 3,500 years ago. And we see that now. The things we see that could happen right now would never happen with Barack Obama in place, or with Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister of Israel, in place. But you've got the Ayatollah over in Iran. You got Bashar Assad still in power in Syria. You got Hassan Nasrallah is in charge over in Lebanon with the Hezbollah. You got Vladimir Putin. The Russian bear has come out of its Cold War slumber up in Russia. Erdogan in Turkey. These guys are all leaders of countries and populations that are involved in end times biblical prophecies. So I just don't think we have enough time for Donald Trump to make this country great again. Yeah. On the timeline, at the same token, I do think he's here for a specific purpose, and that is to unleash these biblical prophecies that are Middle East centered, and I think they're about to happen.
I agree with you, Bill, and that was very well said. And the only way that Trump will be able to make America great again is if all the citizens of this country get involved and actually do their part to help him. He can't do it alone, and no one person should be expected to do that. But I agree absolutely with the assessment that this is, what God is doing to continue to fulfill prophecy and set up these end times prophetic battles and wars that we're talking about. I want to ask you, you posted an article on your website about Syria and Assad going to meet with Putin. This is the first place I've seen this article. It's not being talked about anywhere else. Assad, he has been under siege for years now, but he continues to remain in power. He continues to seemingly remain strong, I'd say in part to his allies. What do you think the future holds for him and Syria? As far as we know, the U.S., has basically branded him some kind of terrorist murderer, and they want him removed from power. But do you see him retaining power in Syria?
Well, he's in power because Vladimir Putin pretty much got involved when Barack Obama was, didn't deal with that red line he had put forward with the chemical weapons way back when Obama was president. And then Putin stepped in and said, I'll take care of it. And what he did was he didn't take care of it. The chemical weapons still exist, but he was able to get in there, get the footprint in the Middle East that he's always longed for, that he, and to keep Assad in power and to lockstep with Iran and Hezbollah and that sort of thing. So geopolitically, Assad is looking pretty good right now in his position there. However, Israel has threatened that if there's a war with Iran through Syria, because Iran's going to use Syria as the battlefield, that Israel will take out his palaces and kill him. Now, that has some prophetic implications, because those palaces that they're talking about are in the Damascus area. And Damascus, the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history, goes back to the time of Abraham, is the subject of several biblical prophecies, and Isaiah 17 is a key one. You'll hear a lot of the prophecy guys talking about that right now. And it says that someday Damascus will cease from being a city. It will be a ruinous heap. It will no longer exist. In the Hebrew, it means it will literally be reduced to rubble. And it tells us that when that happens, the desolation in Isaiah 17, verse 9, is caused by the children of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, who are in several biblical prophecies. Israeli Defense Forces today exist in biblical prophecy. I point that out in my book called Psalm 83, The Missing Prophecy Revealed, which is available at prophecydepot.com. But there are also, it says in Isaiah 17, verse 14, as he concludes the prophecy, he says what's going to happen is that one night you're going to see Damascus, but in the morning it will be no more. Now, this is not an attack with bows and arrows back in 732 BC when the Assyrian Empire conquered Damascus. This is a technology, it sounds like to me, that can take out a city overnight, and Israel has that type of technology. And so, I don't think Assad should be breathing very deeply at this point. I can see him and this prophecy happening in the very near future, because Iran is emboldened right now, and Israel and Iran have been going back and forth at each other with targets in Syria. I'm just waiting, to be honest with you, for any given moment now. And Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah up in Lebanon, is waiting for the go-ahead from Iran, from Ayatollah Khomeini and the Republicans, the Republican Guard, to come after, Israel. And so at this point, once he gets that message, he's going to start firing probably about 1,000 missiles per day into Israel. And they'll be headed for the Dimona nuclear reactor. They'll be heading for the Ben Gurion airport. They've got a bank of targets they know are strategic. And Israel's Iron Dome will not be able to stop all of that onslaught. And they will go after Damascus. And they've already said they will go after Damascus. They've even said they'll go after Tehran if this happens. And then that gets into a prophecy in Jeremiah 49 dealing with Iran. And you got Iran in two biblical prophecies, Jeremiah 49 dealing with Elam, E-L-A-M, and Ezekiel 38 dealing with Persia, which is what Iran used to be called until 1935. It was then called Iran. So, again, I advise all of your audience to, read their Bibles, because there's so much fake news on the news right now. The deep state is underneath it. That, you don't want to limit yourself to just a secular worldview. It's interesting you talk about Trump and the effect he's having on the media and things like that. I was watching the press release after he had stepped away with the withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the Iran deal, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders was doing the press, and a liberal young woman asked Sarah Huckabee Sanders, listen, Trump is withdrawn from the nuclear deal, and Hillary Clinton says this and how that's a bad idea, and she quoted it. And former Secretary of State John Kerry says this, and what he says, and Barack Obama says that it'll lead to war, and so what does your administration have to say about that? And Sarah Huckabee Sanders goes, well, look, considering their past failed foreign policy of those three individuals, they're the last three people in the world we'd ever take advice from. That's the kind of thing that we got with Donald Trump. I just don't think he has enough time to reverse same-sex marriages, to deal with abortion issues, to get Bible reading back in the schools and prayer back in the schools, the types of things that over the last 6 decades, when America said, we don't need you anymore, God, and we kind of pushed God away. And in order for Donald Trump to make America great again, he's going to have to bring God back into the country, and I just don't think there's enough time for that.
Amen. Wow, Bill, this is one of those interviews that's flying by so quickly, and I'm sitting here grinding my teeth wishing that we had more time with you because there's so much to cover. But one of the things I've noticed, especially in recent weeks, Bill, and this is a little bit of a touchy subject, but I think we can bring some form of analysis to it. There is a distinct division among our community right now, and I will leave out names and for expediency and respect's sake, but nonetheless, there's a division in thought regarding the entire concept of Jewish Zionism, etc. But I think, and this is just my personal opinion, Bill, that what some people are missing is the deep state is not uniquely American by any means. That, of course, there's a deep state in the P+1, the P5+1, as you mentioned a moment ago, and there's a deep state in Israel. Some people regard Prime Minister Netanyahu as perhaps part and party to that deep state. I've even heard many very intelligent commentators sort of couple Jared Kushner and his efforts to that as well. Bill, what do you think is the primary political motivation right now, particularly when we look at the conflagration with Israel and Iran? Can we accept much of what we're reading in the surface mainstream narrative, or is there a real deep state component at work here?
Well, okay. First of all, I want to make a clarification. Earlier in the program, I talked about Iran's Republican Guard. I meant Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Iraq has a Republican Guard. But with that clarified, to answer your question, first of all, there's no shortage of conspiracy theories on every subject that you can imagine. And there can always be one, especially with the fake news and things like that. That's why I tell people, fasten yourselves into the Word of God. If there's any application to something going on in the world, if there's anything predictive about it, know it, because that inside of that will actually be the truth of the matter. From my perspective, I listen to these types of things. I just don't see Benjamin Netanyahu and his Israeli leadership around him, nor Donald Trump with John Bolton, Nikki Haley, and all the other pro-Israel people around him, having some sort of deep state agenda that is underlying all this stuff. I think it's just a matter of, there's issues dealing around out there with enemies of Israel. They want to wipe it off the map. Nuclear potential to do that. A nuclear arms race about to happen if Iran goes and starts to get a nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia is going to be right on their heels. I'm staying fairly fastened to this is the real geopolitical scenario. It's dangerous. The next thing we see in the Middle East is going to probably be a war, and it's going to be epic. It's going to be biblical. It's not going to be another crosstown rivalry. We're seeing that with the border movement of the Gaza. The Hamas are there trying to break into Israel. Those throwing stones at the Jews and crosstown rivalries and taking out tunnels with Hamas and all that, that's just child's play compared to what I think is about to happen over there. I really think people need to be realizing that something could happen that will shock their world in the very near future that is probably prophetic. You look at what's even going on in Nicaragua. You don't even hear about this anymore. I just had a pastor over there who translates my articles from Spanish and English, saying that Daniel Ortega has got a crisis going on, a emergency crisis, and this pastor has run out of food, and he's got a wife and kids, and he's asking me to send him some money. Now, this guy would never do that if it wasn't such a crisis. And what we're going to see in the world when we start talking about these things in the book of Revelation is these pockets throughout the world that are going to be struggling, and they're going to have famines and pestilences and issues and emergency crises, and it says peace will be taken from the earth. So, I think, the age of grace we're living in right now, you can accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, put your faith in Him, but there's going to come a time where the world's going to go ballistic. And I think we're on the precipice of that period of time. Watch this stuff very closely, guys. And I would say things could come and affect us in America. Recently, a report came out, it was last year, that said if there was even a basic electromagnetic pulse that hit this country, we would be out for a year, at least a minimum of a year. And that could be man-made, or that could be, solar, or some kind of, natural disaster-caused thing. So Americans need to realize, hey, listen, we need to be prepared for things that could happen, whether they're biblical or not. The environment is so hostile right now throughout the world. The technologies are so advanced that we just need to be careful. We need to be aware of what the world we live in at this point.
Absolutely right, Bill. I want to ask you this. A lot of people are taking issue with Israel and what happened with the protesters, and I'm glad to see this article on your site. Ready for a shocker? I agree with Hamas. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he agrees with Hamas because the leader of Hamas came out and said that 50 of the 62 dead protesters actually were Hamas terrorists, and their goal was to tear down the border and tear out the hearts of the Israelis. So we see that all the media's hype about innocent, peaceful protesters being killed was just lies. And but I want to ask you this: there's a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of hate for Israel out there when these events occur, and we know what Scripture tells us, which a lot of Christians don't acknowledge, is that in the tribulation, in the end times, Israel, as you said, will be invaded, and 2/3 of the country will be destroyed, along with the population that lives there. Most will die. How does is America even relevant at this point, or is what you just mentioned, the EMP, some kind of other thing, keep us neutered when that happens? Because we know if we are the powerful nation we are today, that would never be able to happen.
Correct. And you quoted Zechariah 13:8, where it says 2/3 of the Jews will be cut off in the land, and that has not found fulfillment yet, and they are in the land, and that is perpetrated by the Antichrist, who's not revealed yet, and it is going to be a worse genocidal attempt than any in the past, at the time of Pharaoh, when the Hebrews were coming out of Egypt, or at the time of Prime Minister Haman of the Persian Empire at the time of Esther, or the time of Hitler. So it is a powerful prophecy, and it really tells us is that anti-Semitism is not going to go away. The Antichrist is going to rally up his Armageddonites, and they're going to be anti-Semitic, and they're going to try to kill the Jews. And this is a grave warning by a Hebrew prophet that the Jews need to look at. It's in their Old Testament. We're not trying to throw Jesus stuff at them. We're saying, look, read your Old Testament. When did that find fulfillment? If you're a Jewish person living in Israel right now, you're in the land, and you could be the subject of that prophecy. And so, pay attention, dear Jewish person. At the same token, what about America? Of course, this is the $50 million question. Where's America in Bible prophecy? And where are we at? I would say we are in Bible prophecy. Matter of fact, in my Now Prophecies book, at prophecydepot.com, I put a chapter in there about dealing with America, and I believe we are in Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38 is one of the big marquee prophecies of the end times. It tells us it happens in the latter days. It's 52 verses scattered throughout Ezekiel 38 and 39. You can be a third grader to read these prophecies and walk away with a basic understanding of what's going to happen. God intended it to be this way because it's the event where he's going to make his holy name known in the midst of his people Israel. He will not allow them to profane it anymore, and the nations will know that he's God. And what it is a massive invasion that Russia puts together with Iran, Turkey, Turkey, some North African countries, some of the breakaway Soviet Republic countries, and they're going to come down against Israel for plunder and booty in the latter days, and it'll be too formidable for America to stop. It will be too formidable for the IDF to stop. And it's God who stops it supernaturally with an earthquake, fire, hailstone, and brimstone. And it's going to be unbelievable. The world's going to watch it. And that's when it says, and I have made my holy name known to my people Israel. So he'll have the stamp of, authority over that people will recognize that was the God of Israel that did that. Well, anyway, when it gets to America, the reason we don't believe America is in powerful and superpower at that time is because when you look at that prophecy, it talks about 9 invaders. Russia puts together a coalition of 9. You have a victim, which is Israel. You have a victor, which is the God of Israel. But you have these other 4 populations in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, called Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions, and they're neither invading nor are they protecting Israel. They have commercial interests involved with Israel because Israel's wealthy at the time. Russia's coming for the plunder and booty. That's their goal, Russia and their coalition. And when you do your research, you figure out, well, Sheba is Yemen, Dedan is Saudi Arabia, merchants of Tarshish and their young lions, the colonies that came out of the loins of some, whoever the merchants of Tarshish are. Who are they? Well, the 2 primary arguments of who the merchants of Tarshish are would be Spain, and the colonies that came out of them would be South America and the Latino countries and things like that in Central America, or the UK. And of course, at that, you would have Australia, India, Canada, America, of course, this sort of thing. I've done my research. The Spain argument is terribly weak. And so I put America in there. UK is the merchants of Tarshish, and the young lions, I see America there. We've been the most geopolitically involved with the Middle East, trying to make peace deals. They used Jimmy Carter, of course, was instrumental in brokering a peace between Egypt and Israel in 1979, I believe it was. Bill Clinton in 1994 brokered a peace treaty between Jordan and Israel. The UK was involved after World War I with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, with France divvying up the Middle East. There's been no Spain involved in the Middle East at all in our time for any intents and purposes. So anyway, here's the point. Well, if that's America on the sidelines and Russia's invading with this massive coalition, why are we sitting there merely protesting? Because if Russia was coming against Israel today, America would not tolerate that, not with Donald Trump. So what happens? Something happens to America between now and then, and this is our concern. And that then is probably coming pretty closely because we see the relationships with Russia and Iran and Turkey's hatred for Israel. And these are players and participants invading in Ezekiel 38. So I agree. There's a concern. Is it the rapture of the church? Will take out a lot of Christians. Is it an EMP? Is it internal terrorism? Some kind of nuclear scenario? Something happens, this is of concern, something happens to America if that's us in Ezekiel 38, where we are no longer the superpower country we know and love. And Donald Trump right now is kind of building back our image through a position of strength. But something could happen very soon, folks, if that's us in that prophecy.
Wow. And
my goodness. You know what, Joe? Go ahead. It's just such profundity. By all means, follow up.
Yeah, Bill, what you just said is, I believe, right on the money, and especially about the part of seeing all this stuff happening in the Middle East, seeing all this prophetic stuff happening. We are getting closer to whatever it is that keeps America or hinders America from these end times events. And that is a major concern and something we need to remain vigilant about. But Bill, I want to ask you this: all this news, one thing that's being overlooked by the mainstream media intentionally is being censored, is this huge criminal conspiracy in their attempts to impeach or hinder Donald Trump from becoming president. We learned that they have the FBI and DOJ launched an investigation into Trump 100 days before the election, proving James Comey lied to Congress under oath and proving this criminal conspiracy against the president. I just want to ask your opinion on this. How do you think this Mueller investigation is going to play out? Do you think they're going to be successful in their attempts to impeach President Trump?
I don't think so. Again, I don't know the future of that particular thing, but listen to what I can tell people. They're also trying to get Benjamin Netanyahu and indict him on different things as well. I mean, the spotlight right now of newsworthiness is on the Middle East. I believe God has got the theater opened up there. The spotlights are on there. The flashlight that the news keeps focusing on is on the Mueller investigation and the Stormy Daniels thing and Donald Trump this and all that. I mean, it just depends on where you want to turn your attention, folks. I mean, the mainstream media is giving you a bunch of fake news for the most part, but where the focus is right now, that walking away from the Iran nuclear deal was a huge deal on May 8th when we withdrew. Moving our embassy there on May 14th in commemoration of the 70-year anniversary was a huge deal. The spotlight is Middle East. I would say, listen, this 70-year scenario is a pretty big deal because when you look back in history, when it came to the land of Israel, the Jews were taken over by the Babylonians. They went into 70 years of captivity. It was predicted it would happen by Jeremiah. We were told the reason it happened was so that the land of Israel could have what was called its Sabbath rest. Every 7 years, it was called a Shemitah year, the Jews were to give, it's called a release, a Shemitah. They were to give that land up and forfeit their debts and things like that and trust in God so that the next 7 years they could just totally rely on him and this sort of thing. Well, they were not doing that. They owed God that 70 years of Shemitahs and rest for the Sabbath, rest for the land. That 7th year was always supposed to be a rest. He took them out of the land. He disciplined them for 70 years, and then King Cyrus of Persia, who they're celebrating enormously in Iran, by the way. I was just on a TV show 4 days before Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal in Iran, watched by millions of Iranians as I'm talking about King Cyrus and this prophecy about Elam. 4 days before Trump withdraws from it, it's on the #1 satellite TV show in Iran. I was on it talking to them about biblical prophecy. They're celebrating him. Well, King Cyrus in 539 BC becomes the king. He sends the Jews back into the land. It was predicted by Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 44, 130 years before Cyrus was the king. And so they come back into the land. So here's my question to your listeners. If God was going to kick the Jews out, his chosen people, out of their promised land of the Old Testament, part of the Abrahamic covenant, for 70 years so the land could have rest, how do you think he's going to treat the Arabs who've given that land no rest for the last 70 years? Something, in my estimation, is going to happen. And I believe that's why we got all the kings in the right places, Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, and stuff, and the bad kings, like I said, Nasrallah and Ayatollah and things like that, Assad. There's no technology that has not been formed, no weapon has not been fashioned, no national relationship of the end times that is not formed or in the formative stages to prevent all Bible prophecies to start finding fulfillment soon and sequentially. And when they do find fulfillment, they'll be like birth pains, Jesus told us in Matthew 24. So as we get closer to the second coming of Jesus Christ, like a mother giving birth, the contractions and they'll increase and they'll become more intense, and so will world events, so will the prophetic events. They'll become more intense and they'll become more frequent. It won't be another 70 years until we find the fulfillment of the next Bible prophecy, like it was 70 years ago when Israel was born as a nation. And when these contractions start to happen, they will be unstoppable. The baby's going to come out. And I think we're at that point in time right now where we need to take this stuff very seriously.
Absolutely. Bill Salas is our guest. ProphecyDepotMinistries.net is the website. Check out his books. He writes some awesome books. The Now Prophecies was a great book. One of my favorites, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, The Ancient Prophecy of Elam, and many more. That the DVD, New Apocalypse Road DVD, is available there, as well as all kinds of great and important news for our time. We are out of time, Bill, but I want to thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insight into all these just fantastic and crazy events that we see unfolding before us each and every day now. And we're going to have to remain vigilant and, as you said, pay very close attention to what's happening, because these are very interesting and special times that we live.
Great to be on the program again, you guys. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Bill. And I will be emailing you shortly with date options to join us post-haste on the Hagmann Report.
Awesome.
All right, that'll do it for us this week. Don't forget Hagmann Report tonight, 7 p.m. Also, our sponsor, simplycleanfoods.net. Use promo code SimplyClean. There is all kinds of great products, new products that they have there, and you can go to simplycleanfoods.net and peruse the website. Check out their, everything they got going on. They have the alt media pack now. You don't have to pay for it for 6 months, 0 interest. All you have to do is click on simplycleanfoods.net and use the PayPal credit. They got all kinds of new things, food and other resources, water filtration straws. So make sure you support us through supporting them. That'll do it for us. We'll see you back here on Monday.
The Hagmann Daily Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.